Tonight on Ukraine Today, loud and precise Ukrainian drones struck a number of targets inside Russia and in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. The world's first army, Ukrainian troops defeated combined NATO forces during joint exercises. Munich perspectives. What agreements did the Ukrainian delegation bring back from the security conference? Fakes and manipulations. How is Russian propaganda covering Russia's participation in 2026 Winter Olympics in Italy? All this and more right now. Hello, I'm Volodymyr Robchun and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, like this video, and let's get to the news. Let's start with something loud and precise. Ukrainian drones struck several targets inside Russia and in the temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories. Among them, the Taman-Neftegas oil terminal in Russia's Krasnodar region, a Panzer S-1 air defense system in Crimea, a repair unit belonging to one of the occupier's artillery brigades in the Donetsk region, and a concentration of enemy manpower in the Zaporizhzhia region. Over the past 24 hours, Russia lost at least 1,180 troops killed and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, that brings the total to 1,254,450 occupiers. In addition, during the last day, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 4 Russian tanks, 5 armored combat vehicles, 26 artillery systems and dozens of other pieces of enemy military equipment. Russia's so-called spring offensive has not even properly begun and already looks like a failure. The reason is quite simple: technological lag. I'm not talking about Ukraine's newest developments, I mean the American system that helps Ukraine's defense forces and no longer helps the occupiers. Yes, it's Starlink. Details in the report.
But today we are in urgent need of the Starlink system. Help us!
Elon Musk is thwarting the Russian offensive. Putin's spring military campaign is now in serious doubt.
Thank you to Elon Musk for modern technology. It works great, very tasty.
So, the director of the Ukrainian Center for Security and Cooperation, Dmytro Dzhmailo, said immediately after the Starlink terminals were blocked, the Russian army quickly switched to Telegram to maintain at least some communication on the front line. But the very next day, the messenger was declared hostile, after which it stopped working as well.
Huh? Why aren't you laughing? It's not funny. You didn't get it, did you? This is Russia.
As a result, today's Russian offensive and the more strategic objective for the spring of 2026 are on the verge of failure. Moreover, neither the Kremlin nor even the propagandist Z platforms are hiding their panic, where they openly talk about what it really means for the occupiers to be left without communication.
For example, here's how a tank operates on the front line right now. There's a small Starlink V5 installed on the tank. I know, it currently costs 35,000 rubles. So it's installed on every tank. Through this Starlink, the guys working from the tank get online. On a tablet or phone, they get a live feed from a Mavic drone flying high above. And so, as they fire from the tank, they can see in real time exactly where their shells are landing. They can adjust for elevation, angle, and direction. At the same time, they're in voice contact with the commander over the internet, and the commander gives them instructions on where to fire. This house, the next house, that trench, and so on. If all of this collapses, we basically roll back to the last century.
But the rollback is already happening. So our military is observing how the Russians have reverted to the tactics of 2022 to 2023, back when Musk's advanced technologies were still unknown to them.
They, quite simply and conservatively, were laying internet cables, setting up reinforced Wi-Fi transmitters that operated directly at various levels of headquarters, and so on. But first and foremost, when it came to internet communications, this was the kind of setup they focused on.
At the same time, it's worth noting that cables can be cut, and all transmitters and antennas have to be installed on tall structures, and they absolutely cannot be covered with anything, unlike, say, Starlinks. As a result, our drones just got some more interesting work to do.
In front of us is an attack by a Ukrainian FPV drone on special equipment that the Russians placed on a power line pole. While the Ukrainian armed forces have full internet access with Starlink, the Russians don't even have this so-called alternative right now. And as soon as they tried to set up this alternative, it immediately started getting hit.
However, while the Russians are using Starlinks as cup holders, the command still hopes that the foreign equipment will eventually start working. For example, in Russia, they are looking for Ukrainians who for money will officially register satellite dishes and give them a second life. Ukrainian hackers immediately responded to this.
They created numerous fake platforms, including those very Telegram bots, which offered to do exactly that. A drop service for adding these very terminals to the whitelist. That's how they ended up tracking them down. First, they found out the numbers of the Starlinks that the Russian military wanted to sneak onto the whitelist this way. Second, they received almost $6,000 from the Russian military.
They got scammed. They were just blatantly deceived.
And now today, the deceived Russians are once again claiming that they've outsmarted the treacherous West. The alternative was presented with such pomp, the stratospheric platform Barrage 1. Naturally, it's domestically made.
We don't even produce our own nails in a country that manufactures so much metal.
In short, a Wi-Fi transmitter with an amplifier is lifted into the sky on a balloon, which in theory can provide internet to the areas it drifts over for up to 2 days.
It's important to have good connectivity so you can always stay in touch. Nowadays, in this technological age, all information, maps, and everything else, without the internet, you can't do anything.
In reality, as reported by Le Monde, Russia has significantly lost its battlefield potential due to the loss of Starlink. The accuracy of long-range strikes is steadily declining. Sometimes the occupiers don't even realize that their defensive line has been breached, and their losses during assaults increase with every new attempt to advance on the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces.
Right now, Russian soldiers are being sent into assaults without the ability to receive real-time intelligence, without the ability to launch drones, and adjust the actions of Russian troops in real time, such as telling them where Ukrainian soldiers are, how best to maneuver around, how to avoid obstacles, and so on. That capability no longer exists now.
It's noteworthy that back in 2023, the commander-in-chief of the Russian armed forces, Gerasimov, promised to present their own satellite communication system in the shortest possible time. 3 years later, it has become clear they should have listened to Matvienko and at least started with making their own nails.
Russian forces shelled the Zaporizhzhia region. Over the past day, the occupiers carried out 668 strikes on 32 settlements. They used aircraft, drones and artillery. At least 6 people were injured. Protection against Russian ballistic missiles, joint weapons production with Europe, and the restoration of Ukraine's energy system. President Volodymyr Zelensky summed up the meetings at the Munich Security Conference. In his evening address, he said the following.
There were many meetings. The most important outcome will be new support packages for Ukraine. Above all, missiles for air defense to protect against ballistic threats. This is the #1 issue throughout this entire winter. You know this. That is why in Munich we spoke about it, in fact with every leader who can truly help us.
Zelensky also spoke about what Ukraine brings to Europe.
Today, there is no leader in Europe who does not speak about the need for much greater independence for Europe, much greater self-reliance and autonomous strength for all of Europe. This is now one of the main trends. We are proposing concrete steps, concrete projects that will make Europe stronger.
And the president shared plans for this week, including trilateral peace talks.
This week, trilateral meetings are expected to take place. The Ukrainian delegation has the necessary framework for the talks. Yesterday, we coordinated with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Ukraine will always be constructive, the American side knows this. But Ukrainians need to see real progress on security, to have sufficient trust. Trust both in the diplomatic process and in its possible results.
By the way, the Ukrainian delegation has already arrived in Geneva. A meeting between representatives of Ukraine, the United States and Russia is scheduled for February 17th to 18th. Continuing with the Munich Security Conference and the peace negotiations, the High Representatives of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, addressed the Kremlin's demands. She stated that Russia is currently getting more at the negotiation table than on the battlefield.
Russia's maximalist demands cannot be met with minimalist response. Think about it. If Ukraine's military is to be limited in size, Russia should be too. Where Russia has caused damage in Ukraine, Russia should pay. No amnesty for war crimes, return of the Ukrainian deported children. This is really the very least Russia should agree if peace is Russia's goal.
Ukrainian troops defeated combined NATO forces during joint exercises. The result highlights serious flaws in global military rankings, where Russia is supposedly ranked second. All the details next.
The Ukrainian armed forces crushed NATO troops, and I mean that literally, not figuratively. During the large-scale hedgehog exercises, which is what hedgehog translates to, held in Estonia, special units of the North Atlantic Alliance suffered a complete fiasco. This happened almost a year ago. However, it appears that the secrecy surrounding the results of the exercises has only now been lifted.
Ukrainian military personnel have demonstrated that NATO armies are not prepared for modern warfare. Drones. More than 16,000 military personnel from 12 alliance countries took part in the maneuvers. In one scenario, NATO units attempted to launch an offensive but were quickly destroyed.
NATO generals could not believe what was happening. In the MiG, they lost 2 battalions of their elite soldiers along with all their heavy equipment. Nothing like this had ever happened before at any military exercises. The first surprise for NATO forces was the Ukrainian drone operators. The West knew that UAVs are currently one of the most effective weapons on the front, but they did not expect that in the skilled hands of Ukrainian soldiers they would prove to be so deadly.
The Ukrainian team were fighters from the Unmanned Systems Forces units, bomber operators from the 412th Nemesis Brigade, and FPV crews from the 427th Rarol Brigade. FPV operators from the International Legion also took part in the exercises on the Ukrainian side. The main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine and representatives of the Delta Situational Awareness System.
It was precisely the BOEM Delta control system, which collects intelligence data in real time, analyzes it using artificial intelligence, and coordinates strikes that help the Ukrainian armed forces destroy the forces of the theoretical enemy. In addition, the Western military personnel moved around without camouflage, set up tents and armored vehicles right out in the open, making them easy targets for drones. After that, during the exercises, the Ukrainian infantry took over.
According to the scenario, a group of 10 Ukrainian servicemen disabled 17 armored vehicles in half a day using drones, and they carried out about 30 more strikes on various targets. If this level of intensity were maintained, the notional losses in a day could reach the scale of up to 2 battalions.
It turned out that the NATO Hedgehog had lost all its spines. If these had been real combat operations and not exercises, the Ukrainian armed forces would have completely broken through the alliance's defenses in a single day. And in a day or two, they would already be at the gates of Berlin.
Our Western partners are not ready to implement modern methods. We have always said this. That's why I said that if the enemy is redeployed to another theater of military operations, the situation there could develop in a very dramatic way.
The realization of this prospect shocked the NATO generals.
One of the European commanders summed up what he saw after the exercises with the phrase, "We're in deep trouble."
And it seems that only the soldiers of the Ukrainian armed forces, who are now bravely fighting on the front lines against the Russian occupiers eager to seize half of Europe, are preventing this from happening. The Ukrainian...
Their army that is widely considered the strongest army in all of Europe. The Ukrainian army is the strongest army in Europe, thanks to our heroes. And I think it's simply foolish to keep this army outside of NATO.
Poland should move toward developing its own nuclear potential while fully respecting international norms. This was stated by Polish President Karol Nawrocki. He added that Poland stands on the edge of armed conflict and understands very well the attitude of aggressive imperial Russia toward it. Is the nuclear race becoming relevant again? Germany and France are reportedly holding talks about a European Union nuclear arsenal. The reasons? The Russian threat and attention, the position of the United States. Details in the report.
Is nuclear war closer than we think? For the first time since the Cold War, Europe is talking about creating its own nuclear shield. The impetus was doubts about security guarantees from the US, the so-called crisis of trust in Trump, and of course the threat from Russia. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that Germany and France are holding talks on European nuclear deterrence.
We are not doing this by writing off NATO. We are doing this by creating a strong, self-sufficient European pillar within the alliance, the Chancellor said in his speech.
But why are these discussions starting now? Is it fear of Putin, or is it anxiety over Trump's inaction? According to experts, it's a combination of threats.
The European Union is now concerned about its own security, not just because of Donald Trump's inaction, but also due to his excessive hyperactivity regarding certain territories of the European Union. First and foremost, this refers to Greenland and the threat to Denmark in light of the statements repeatedly made by the President of the United States. Of course, a serious argument is also needed against Russia for those countries in Europe that consider themselves hegemons. Once again, that's France and Germany. And Germany is currently deprived of the ability to possess nuclear weapons. It is only stationed on its territory, and this nuclear weapon belongs to the United States. That is why Germany has started thinking about having its own nuclear deterrent to feel more secure without relying, let's say, on some of its allies.
As Bloomberg reports, the idea involves expanding France's nuclear umbrella, but it is still unclear whether Paris will agree to offer nuclear deterrence to other European countries. So far, there have been no proposals from Macron. In addition, the potential development of individual countries' own defense capabilities is also being considered. According to Western journalists citing their sources, for most EU countries, replacing the American nuclear umbrella with a European one is not an option. At the very least, this is because Europe is already spending a lot of resources on building up its conventional military power. Therefore, even in Europe, no one fully knows yet what nuclear protection will actually look like.
How is this supposed to work? I don't think even the Europeans themselves fully understand. As of today, among European countries that possess nuclear weapons, there is France and the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has a fairly strong retaliatory capability, just like France. And in this case, the United States serves as an additional counterbalance on German territory, providing the ability to use an extensive satellite reconnaissance system in low Earth orbit, along with many other advantages. And if the European nations were to lose this position, then overall it would still maintain the military capability, if we are talking about potential security threats from the Russian Federation, to deliver a significant retaliatory strike against the European part of Russia, if it becomes necessary.
Currently, the only nuclear powers in Europe are indeed the United Kingdom and France. According to estimates, together they have about 400 warheads, whereas the United States possesses a significantly larger arsenal. France, meanwhile, maintains a full cycle of nuclear warhead production, whereas the United Kingdom is partially dependent on US technologies and supplies. It is Paris that could play a key role in creating a new European nuclear deterrence system. On February 5th, 2026, the Russian-American Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty officially expired. Nothing is holding Russia and the US back from a nuclear arms race anymore. Nuclear arms control has come to an end. Adding fuel to the fire are the deteriorating relations between Russia and the US, as well as Putin's desire to push the war deeper into Europe. Is nuclear war really getting closer? If you thought so too, it's too early to buy iodine because, as experts say, this is highly unlikely. A good example of how nuclear weapons are not used even under the strictest doctrine is Russia's war against Ukraine.
And here a question arises. What has been happening for several years now in the deep rear of the Russian Federation? And not just the deep, but also the near rear. What is happening is that Ukraine is striking with drones, strike drones, long-range drones, at strategic targets, at nuclear facilities, destroying Russian strategic aviation that is part of the nuclear triad's air wing, launching missile strikes, destroying oil refining facilities, military-industrial complex sites, energy infrastructure, entering Russian territory and conducting raids there, controlling hundreds of square kilometers for months at a time. Where is the response? Where is the nuclear response? So this is yet another example that nuclear weapons are nothing more than a kind of placebo effect, which even under the strictest nuclear doctrine is practically impossible to use in a conventional war.
Therefore, the same question remains. Can Europe defend itself with nuclear weapons against an enemy? That question is still open.
Will France, Germany, or the United Kingdom use nuclear weapons if Russia seizes Estonia, if it invades Finland, if it begins to storm the Suwalki corridor and carve a path from Belarus to the Kaliningrad region, from Kaliningrad to Belarus and moves directly toward Warsaw? In other words, will this weapon be used if all of this happens within the boundaries of a conventional war? I think not. And as long as Europe hasn't figured out all these circumstances, these discussions remain just talk.
If Europe actually moves toward developing its own nuclear deterrent, this could change the balance of power in the world and call into question the existing nuclear non-proliferation system. But even under these conditions, experts do not believe that nuclear war is a real possibility, at least in the short term.
I don't believe in nuclear war. If it could have started, it would have started long ago.
Discussions about a European nuclear shield are still at an early stage, but the very fact that they have emerged points to serious changes in the global security architecture. But the fact that Europe is starting to think about its own defense is a clear signal that military action on EU territory is entirely possible.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now's a perfect moment to subscribe to the channel, like this video and share it. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine. Hungary should fear Brussels, not Putin. That's according to Prime Minister Viktor Orban. In his view, warnings about the Kremlin dictator are primitive and unserious. Brussels, he claims, is the source of inevitable danger. A question for Mr. Orban. Do his words reflect the position of the majority in Hungary? I believe we will find out in about 2 months, when parliamentary elections take place. It is possible that Orban openly calls the EU a threat and Putin a friend, because he understands he may have already lost his chance at victory, and is now aiming to secure as many anti-European and pro-Russian votes as possible in order to gain influence in the opposition. And finally, about fakes and manipulations. This concerns Russia's participation in the 2026 Winter Olympics in Italy. Here's how Russian propaganda presents these competitions.
On February 6th, the main sporting event on the planet, the Winter Olympics, kicked off in the Italian cities of Milan and Cortina. On Russian TV, a whole anti-campaign was launched, claiming that the Italians had completely failed in preparing for the competition. Unlike the Sochi Olympics in 2014.
Lighting the torch, 2 seconds. They built the facilities almost as quickly, handed them over in a rush, did tests carelessly, and couldn't keep up.
Well, here come the torchbearers. Milan has been living in this kind of chaos for the second day now.
All the federal channels started shouting in unison that most of the tickets for the Olympic opening ceremony hadn't been sold, and the event would take place with half-empty stands. The Israeli team and US Vice President Vance were booed at the opening ceremony in Milan. Italy was completely unprepared for the Olympics. In short, a whole bunch of problems.
With half-empty stands and angry booing, the 25th Winter Olympic Games opened in Italy.
There are still 2 hours left before the start of the Winter Olympics in Italy, but the first scandals are already rocking Milan.
Russian reports pay special attention to corruption. The Olympics set an anti-record. By the start of the Games, only 42% of the venues were completed. Some venues hosted events surrounded by piles of garbage, and in some places, parts of the facilities and stands weren't finished at all. The main reason is corrupt Italian officials. On the day of the Games' opening, Channel 1 didn't show the ceremony at all, but instead aired a film about the 2014 Sochi Olympics called Your Hot Winter. And in the news there was a report about street riots in Milan. The 2014 Winter Olympic Games in Sochi went down in history as the most expensive sporting event ever organized, with a staggering cost of over $51 billion. For comparison, the Games in Italy cost up to 6 billion euros. For comparison, the average pension in Italy ranges from 1,500 to 2,000 euros, while in Russia it's about 260 euros. Here's an interesting fact. There were about 60,000 spectators at the San Siro Stadium in Milan. This was reported by The Guardian. But at the opening of the Sochi Olympics in 2014, there were a third fewer, and this is official information.
About 40,000 people were direct witnesses to the opening of the Games at the Fishti Stadium. These figures are provided by the Sochi 2014 Organizing Committee on the official Olympic portal.
The cherry on top, when it comes to Russian propaganda's coverage of the Winter Olympics, was the Ukrainian national team, to which pro-Kremlin writers and bloggers paid special attention.
On social networks like Telegram and vKontakte, claims are being spread that Kyiv allegedly planned to send 120 agents from the security service of Ukraine to Milan to make sure that none of the members of the Ukrainian delegation would escape. It is reported that the Italian authorities allegedly forbade this. The so-called proof is a Reuters video in English. In reality, of course, Reuters never published anything of the sort. Similarly, on Twitter and vKontakte, a similar story is being spread claiming that the SBU allegedly confiscated the passports of Ukrainian athletes' family members so that they would not stay in Italy after the Olympics. As proof, a fake video from an unnamed English-language media outlet is shown. At the same time, the logo used as the publication's icon was actually that of a Telegram channel belonging to a Russian opposition media agency.
The principle behind such fake news is very simple. It creates a sense of credibility by imitating a reputable source. A fake report from Reuters is being spread through Russian Telegram channels. It contains falsified statements about Ukrainian skeleton racer Vladislav Heraskevich, who was disqualified by the IOC for wearing a helmet with photos of athletes killed in the war. The fake report claims that his brother works at a Kyiv military enlistment office.
The Russians have launched an information campaign to discredit Ukraine and its athletes in the run-up to the 2026 Olympic Games. The goal is to discredit Ukraine on the international stage, damage the reputation of Ukrainian athletes, and spread anti-Ukrainian narratives among the global audience.
The reason for such an irrational information policy by the federal channels is simple. Russia and Belarus have been banned from participating in the Games under their national flags because of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Like, subscribe, comment, share. And see you next time.